The wind slammed the door so hard the whole house shook, and Marlene grabbed the table to stay standing. Outside, a wagon was stopping at her gate, and two small shapes sat huddled on the bench next to old Sheriff Combs. Marlene pressed a hand to her round belly and stepped out into the cold without even grabbing her shawl. The sheriff climbed down slow, his old joints stiff from the ride. "Found 'em outside Dry Creek," he said. "Wagon train left without 'em." A boy sat frozen on the bench, holding a little girl so tight his knuckles had turned white as bone. He did not cry. He did not speak. He just stared at Marlene the way a rabbit stares at a wolf, waiting to see which way she would jump. Marlene looked at the children's ragged blanket, then down at her own belly, 6 months round with a baby who would never meet its father. Every neighbor in the valley would have told her to shut the door. She had $11 in a tin box. She had a cow that barely gave milk. She had no husband to help her chop wood or stand watch at night. Taking in 2 more mouths made no sense at all, and everybody standing in that yard knew it. So when Marlene suddenly walked forward and lifted the little girl straight out of the wagon into her own arms, the sheriff's mouth fell open. "Ma'am, you don't have to." "I know what I have to do and what I don't," Marlene said, rocking the girl like she'd known her all her life. "Nobody asked you, Sheriff. I'm asking myself." The boy stared at her now too, confused, like he was waiting for the trick, waiting for her to change her mind and hand his sister back. Marlene turned to him next. She didn't reach for him. She simply held out her free hand, palm up, the way you'd offer a hand to a grown man, not a scared child. "What's your name, son?" His mouth worked for a moment before words came out. "Jacob," he said. "This here's my sister, Nell." "Well, Jacob," Marlene said, "there's a fire inside and soup thin as it is. You coming in or you planning to sit on that wagon all winter?" The sheriff let out a breath he'd clearly been holding, relieved but still stunned by what he'd just watched. He held out a silver dollar, hand a little unsteady. "State'll pay you $1 for the trouble, ma'am." Marlene almost laughed. $1, next to 2 children's whole lives. But she took it anyway, closed her fingers around it, and walked toward her door with Nell on her hip and Jacob following close behind, still watching her like he expected the ground to open up beneath him at any moment. She did not know yet what secret the boy was carrying, or how heavy that secret would turn out to be. 3 weeks went by, and Jacob worked like a grown man twice his age. He fixed the chicken coop before Marlene even noticed it was broken. He carried water buckets until his thin arms shook. But it was the way he watched the road that told Marlene something was wrong. Every wagon, every rider, every sound of hooves made the boy go stiff as a fence post. One cold morning, Marlene was hanging wet clothes on the line when she felt it, that prickling feeling of being watched. She looked up toward the ridge above her land. A man sat still on a bay horse just looking down at her house. He did not wave. He did not move. He just watched like he was counting something. Then, as quick as she'd spotted him, he turned his horse and rode away. That evening, Jacob's face had gone pale as milk. He pushed his beans around his plate without eating a single bite. Nell sat close beside him, quiet as a mouse, the way children go quiet when they can feel trouble coming even if nobody said a word about it yet. Marlene set down her own spoon. "Jacob," she said, "you've been jumping at every little sound since the day you got here. I think it's time you told me why." The boy's fork rattled against his plate. For a long moment he said nothing at all, just stared at the table like the wood might have an answer written on it. "Our pa wasn't a farmer," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "He rode with a man called Silas Rourke. Cattle work mostly, but some other work too, bad work. Pa tried to leave it behind. That's why we was on that wagon train, ma'am. We wasn't going west for land, we was running." "Running from what?" Marlene asked, though part of her already feared the answer. "From Rourke," Jacob said. "Pa knew things. Bad things Rourke done. Cattle that wasn't his to take. Money that wasn't his to keep. Pa said if Rourke's men ever found us, they'd want to know what he told his children before he died." Marlene felt her blood turn cold, colder than the wind rattling the windows. "And did he tell you?" Jacob glanced at his little sister, who was staring hard at her plate like she wished she could disappear into it. "Some," he admitted quietly. "Not all of it, but enough that Rourke wouldn't want it spoken out loud." Marlene could have ridden straight to the sheriff that very night and handed this trouble to somebody else. She was carrying a child. She had no husband, no rifle-ready man standing beside her. Nobody would have blamed her for choosing safety first. Instead, she reached across the table and closed her hand gently around Jacob's trembling one. "You're under my roof now," she said. "Both of you. Whatever comes down that road looking for you, it comes through me first." Jacob's eyes filled with tears, and for the first time since he'd arrived, he let himself cry like the frightened child he truly was. The bay horse came back 4 nights later. This time, it did not stop up on the ridge. Past midnight, Marlene woke to the sound of hooves right outside her window. Her heart jumped hard in her chest. She rose slow and heavy, her big belly making every movement feel like work, and looked out through the glass by candlelight. A man sat tall in the saddle, hat pulled low, a rifle laid easy across his lap like he'd carried it 1,000 times before. "Mrs. Hartley," the man called out, calm and polite like he was greeting her after church. "Name's Silas Rourke. I believe you've got something that belongs to me." Marlene's hands moved fast. She woke Jacob with a palm pressed over his mouth so he wouldn't cry out in fright. "Take your sister to the root cellar," she whispered. "Bar the door from the inside. Don't come out, not for anything, until you hear me call your name. You understand?" Jacob's eyes were wide with fear, but he nodded and grabbed Nell's hand, pulling her toward the back of the house without a single question. Marlene reached up and took down Tom's old shotgun from above the door. Her hands did not shake, though her heart was pounding so loud she feared Rourke might hear it clear across the yard. She had never once fired that gun at a living thing, but she'd watched Tom clean it 100 times, and somehow her hands remembered what her mind had never truly learned. She stepped out onto the porch, the cold night air biting at her skin. The shotgun held steady and level. "I've got 2 orphan children under my roof," she said, her voice far steadier than she felt inside. "That's all that's here, Mr. Rourke. Children, not property, not yours to claim." Rourke smiled, but it never touched his eyes. "Their pa owed me a debt, ma'am. Debts passed down to family. That's simply the way of things out here." "Their pa is dead," Marlene said flatly. "So is any debt he owed you, unless you're planning to dig it up out of his grave." "I plan to collect from whoever's left standing," Rourke said, and he lifted the rifle just an inch, enough to make his meaning plain and cold. Right then more hoofbeats thundered up the road, fast and urgent. Marlene's stomach dropped, certain Rourke had brought more men to finish this. But it was Sheriff Combs instead, his horse lathered white with sweat, a deputy riding close behind him. "Evening, Rourke," the sheriff said, calm as if he'd simply stopped by for coffee. "Heard you had some notion about collecting Ezra Miller's old debts through his children. That true?" Rourke's jaw went tight. "This ain't your business, Sheriff." "Threatening a widow and 2 orphans on her own porch is exactly my business," Combs said. "And I know plenty more about your cattle dealings too, Silas." The color drained clean out of Rourke's face. Without another word, he turned his horse and rode off into the darkness, never to return again. Winter came hard that year, the way Wyoming winters always do, but it came without Silas Rourke's shadow hanging over the house anymore. Sheriff Combs rode out twice more that season. Once, he brought good news. Rourke had been arrested 2 counties over for the very crimes Ezra Miller had whispered to a lawman before he died. The second time, he simply came to check that the widow and her children were staying warm and safe. Marlene's own baby, a little girl, was born in the deep cold of January, right there in the same small house where Jacob and Nell had once stood shivering in the doorway. Jacob held his new almost sister with the same careful, white-knuckled grip he had once used to hold his real one, like he had quietly appointed himself the guardian of every small, fragile thing life put in front of him. By springtime, Nell had stopped crying out in her sleep. She learned to gather eggs from the coop without flinching, without fearing that something worse than hens might be hiding behind that little wooden door. She learned to laugh again, too, a sound Marlene came to believe was one of the hardest things any child has to relearn once fear has taken it away from them. Marlene kept that old silver dollar safe in the same tin box where she kept Tom's wedding ring and a small lock of her mother's hair. It wasn't much money, really. It wouldn't have bought a sack of flour or even a decent length of rope. But as the years rolled on, and the three children grew up together under her roof, calling each other brother and sister without a single second thought, Marlene came to understand something important. That dollar had never truly been the real payment at all. The real payment was the choice she had made that very first cold night, standing in her doorway, looking at a boy's white knuckles and a little girl's frightened face. She had decided, right then and there, that her own grief and fear were not good enough reasons to turn away two children who had absolutely nowhere else left to go. Folks in that part of Wyoming told this story for many years afterward, the way people always do with stories that feel too good and too hard to simply let fade away and be forgotten. Each time it was told, it changed just a little, the way old stories naturally do as they pass from one mouth to another. But the true heart of it never changed, not once. A widow, heavy with her own unborn child and heavy with her own private grief, took in 2 orphans for the price of a single silver dollar. And when danger came riding down the road with a rifle resting across its lap, she did not send that danger away by turning the children out into the cold. Instead, she sent it away by standing firm on her own porch, refusing with everything she had left inside her to let it take one more thing from the family she had already chosen to call her own.